Tariffs, tariffs, tariffs continue to dominate the news, and here to sort it all out is our guest today, Richard Battle. He's written a book called Made in America by Americans, Not Americans. Richard, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, John. Thank you so much for having us with you.
Tell me, what is an Americant?
Well, Americant is a person, in my opinion, who subscribes to the culture and the media and the government telling us what we can't do and that we should rely on someone else, primarily government, to provide us with the few crumbs they think we should have. And I got sick of that, and that's why I started this series, Americans Who Made America, where I profile and highlight people who had that American-do spirit, because I believe that American-do spirit, which comes from our political and economic liberty, is what's made this country what it is, what we've inherited, and what it's our responsibility to pass along to future generations.
Well, I think you're onto something. I've had this paradigm, and I'm reluctant to express it because it sounds like an indictment against everybody that works in government, and that's not fair. But I do think it applies to a large number of people in government, and that is they tell you what you can and cannot do. And those are the people who are typically lazy. They don't want to make an intellectual argument to advance their position. And it's just easier to tell you do this because I said you have to, or you do this because I told you you can't. And so I get the theme that you're advancing. But let me ask you, what do you think Trump's up to with these tariffs? You know, I had dinner last night with a group of really smart people, which I'm still trying to figure out how I got invited. But these folks, I mean, we had a former ambassador to France. We had a respected journalist. We had captains of industry, and they're really kind of sounding the alarm on tariffs. I kind of listened intently and didn't say a lot because personally, I think tariffs are a great thing for the future of our country, but it's going to take some adjustment period to get to the benefit from tariffs. What's your take?
Well, first thing is I believe that the media is oversimplifying the issue, and they're expecting results too quickly. And this issue is a little more complex than most people's attention span for the media. And so they're not allowing him to do what he does best, which is negotiate favorable terms for our country. And first, I trust him because of his negotiating expertise. And second, he's identified something that's probably lasted or existed since World War II, and that is our country not only fought to help win World War II and provided goods. Exactly. Then we rebuilt all these countries, exactly. And then we set up these trade deals to give them favorable terms for years and years and years. And so he's saying we're going broke doing this for all these countries. We need to reset the table more favorably in our direction. And I think a combination of tariffs and renegotiated trade deals are going to be the result, and it will help our economy for generations to come.
Bingo has been called. That is a perfect explanation. And I think you must be a frequent listener of the truth, because we have advanced that thought for the last month. You know, these trade deals were put into effect in the late 40s and early 50s, and they've just lingered for 70 years. And it's time to go clean out the barn and shake off the dust and reformulate. What was established that long ago has no bearing today. And it really is just a simple, I mean, I've got a simple brain, so I can give you a simple explanation. We charge a quarter for an apple, and they're charging us $1 for an orange, and that's just inherently wrong. And so I think trade needs to be fair both ways. And it is my belief that that's what Trump is trying to establish. And one of the biggest results of that is that it is going to be less expensive, more favorable to make these products in America, which is going to employ Americans and is going to put America first. Please, someone make the case why that is not a good idea.
Well, you're correct. And the other aspect of this that is overlooked by many people, but President Trump recognized it, is the national security aspect. If you'll remember history, we were the arsenal of democracy before we got into World War II. We made weapons and all kinds of supplies for people because we had the manufacturing. And then during the war, Roosevelt had his dollar a year men who were the CEOs of these large companies, the auto manufacturers and others, and they donated their time to help manufacture goods for the war. But today, if we had to go through that situation, we do not have the manufacturing infrastructure that we would need. And so reobtaining that will help our national security in the future as well.
So I'm not sure how many countries there are in the world. Do you know the number off the top of your head?
It's somewhere around 200, I believe.
I think it's somewhere around 200. Trump said the other day he had agreements on 200 trade bills. Uh, I was like, I don't think so. He's a salesman. He's known to puff. I can put a filter on it. But really, how many trading partners do you think we have that are material to our economy?
Well, there's probably less than 10 who are the most critical. And but the others can be utilized to help move the ball. And of course, whoever wants the deal worst is going to lose. And President Trump is not rushing into deals. He will make sure we get favorable deals. And whereas I've seen other administrations who were so desperate for agreements that they would agree to almost anything with other countries just so they could say they got an agreement. And a bad deal is worse than no deal. And so patience is important here so that we can end up with the best deals possible. And I believe he's strategically setting these up because each one that's going to be made will influence the ones after them. And so I think he will want them in a certain sequence to add leverage to the leverage he already has.
So I'm so glad to meet you, Richard. You and I think a lot alike. I'll tell you, I identify the EU, India, China, Asia, Canada, and Mexico. I don't know who I've left out there, but that's 5 trading partners. I bet you they make up 90% or more of our trade. And so really, I think what he is endeavoring to do is to get 3 or 4 maybe lesser players in line. Vietnam has already said they're reducing tariffs to 0. Other countries are coming to the middle. He's met with the Prime Minister of India. I think that we are engaged in active talks with India and that we're probably close to a deal. The EU seem to be the people that we've treated the best who want to punish the worst. They're just like spoiled children is my take on it, frankly. Oh, daddy, daddy, don't stop giving me money. And but they're going to have to grow up now. And you touched on a very important point that the media and no one else is really talking about. And that is our defense of Europe, both historically and currently. And that's a baseball bat that Trump has got. That is the Trump card, if you will, that he can play if the EU wants to try and push back. Don't
Well,
you
that's
agree?
exactly correct. And again, the leverage he has, and he recognized it as a deal maker because of our trade deficits. These countries need us buying their goods for their economy, and China's already feeling the effects of the tariffs on them. And so that will compel them, same thing with Canada, to come to the table quicker. And once they show their interest in it, that again strengthens his negotiating levers so that he can make sure we get the best deal possible.
I mean, Trump is tough. You know, I watched him in the Oval Office earlier this week when he was meeting with the newly elected president of Canada. Is it president or prime minister? I think it's prime minister, actually. And he said, frankly, we don't want Canada's cars. We don't want their aluminum. We don't want their steel. And there you got the prime minister sitting right next to him, who's actually seems to me to have been trying to play nice. I felt uncomfortable in the conversation, and I'm 1,000 miles away from where it took place. What do you think the right answer is for Canada and Mexico? We
Well,
lump
and
them together,
let me
but I think
state a
they're
couple.
vastly apart in terms of their economies and socio-economic levels.
Well, let me state a couple of things that I think are real important about his style. He's not a politician, which is obvious, but he's negotiated in the past with his own money and his own risk. Most politicians only negotiate with other people's money. There's no consequences, and so usually they want to swap a deal and pat each other on the back. And so his experience there, I think, is extremely important. The other thing that a great negotiator does, everything he says is part of current negotiations, but he's also, when you're negotiating the deals now, he's already thinking of three, four deals down the road, which are on other topics, including national defense and other things, while the media and the culture are just focused on the present and the deal on the table. And that will benefit us going forward even further because he's laying that groundwork for those other deals.
So, what do you think he's up to with talking about making Canada the 51st state? The thing that has amazed me over the years about Trump is that he makes these outlandish statements, and then damned if 2 or 3 years later, what he said actually becomes reality. What are the odds that you would ascribe to Canada becoming part of the United States?
Well, first, I would not bet against him. Second, Alberta right now is already going through their own issues with the Canadian government. And if we look at Canada, I mean, their GDP and population are about the same size as my state of Texas. So they're a much smaller country population and economy wise, even though they have vast lands. And so I think there's possibilities. We've seen in our history, obviously, the Louisiana Purchase. Uh, Denmark says they don't want to sell us Greenland, but Denmark sold us St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands back in 1917. So there's precedent of some of these type deals. And I see him as a visionary playing a game to make America the greatest country that it can be going forward. And that's the person I don't want because I believe the best government's the closest to us and the worst government's the furthest away. And Washington's too far away for me. And I certainly don't want a government in Brussels or some other European capital as a global government.
You have a great command of history, and you make a phenomenal case that I hadn't considered. Is Alberta kind of our California?
Well, it could be, and obviously there's other states, including Texas and parts of Washington that wants to go to Idaho. There's all kinds of movements in this country right now for people to reassociate with different governmental bodies.
God knows a lot of New Yorkers have come to West Palm Beach and Palm Beach. I'm not sure that's such a good thing. We love the increase in sales tax revenue and property tax revenue, but boy, I tell you, the traffic used to be a lot quieter and the horns a lot less blaring. Back on point, it seems to me that Trump is literally reconstructing the economy of the United States in real time before our very eyes. He is talking about potentially balancing the budget in time, interjecting the greatest tax relief of any U.S. president, imposing tariffs, which will have the effect of creating investment in America. This morning, he said that he's got commitments of $9 trillion of new investment. That is going to have the beneficial effect of eliminating unemployment in its entirety. We will have created a labor shortage by the time $9 trillion is spent on new tools, plant, and equipment, and the people that are going to be required to work there, not even to mention the hundreds of thousands of construction jobs and building materials that will be used. It just seems like we have the potential to really catch on fire here with the U.S. economy, and it's
Well, I,
happening so fast.
well, and I agree with you 100%, but I think it's even bigger than that from the standpoint that he's going to reassert our republic. And I'm sick of politicians on both sides of the fence talking about preserving democracy. We're a republic. Aristotle said republics decline into democracies, democracies degenerate into despotism. And so the republic has been diminishing really since the early 1900s, 1913 with the Fed income tax and the direct election of senators. Since then, there's been this movement to take our focus off republic and make us think of a democracy. The Pledge of Allegiance not being spoken in school, for example. And to me, a republic gives us much more individual freedom versus the collective power that we see in a democracy moving to a global socialist government.
Well, we had a guest on just last week from the Mises Institute, located in Huntsville, Alabama, I believe, or Tuscaloosa, one of the two. Tuscaloosa, I think. They're a think tank that study the economy. And he said that he felt like America's republic went out the window with the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank and the fake money that they print and the control that they exercise over interest rates, which then has phenomenal effects, good or bad, for our economy. And so it sounds like you're kind of making the same case. Well, how do you distinguish a republic from a democracy?
Well, that's a great question.
What are the key
that's one
distinctions that you highlight?
Yeah, we should make sure to teach our children and grandchildren because a democracy is basically mob rule. And so majority rules and everyone else has to sit down and shut up. Whereas in a republic, there are safeguards built in to protect the minority political views and at least keep them from being run over by the majority. And that also makes it to where it's not such an emotional governing body, because then if it's emotional, then changes can come in a whipsaw fashion based on emotions. Whereas a republic, we have the Constitution, which gives us protections as a minority political viewpoint. And I think that's an important thing because our founders gave us individual liberty, not a collective liberty.
Well, I think a lot about the very topic that you're illuminating for us, and I think it's very real. I look at, well, first of all, I ran for office in Georgia, and I remember vividly on election day, I was going out trying to encourage people that I had actually visited previously in the campaign to go vote. And I rang a doorbell, and a very nice lady came to the door, and she said, "Oh, you don't need to bother with me. I've already voted." I said, "Well, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you who you voted for." She said, "Well, I don't know. What's your name?" And I said, "John Gordon." And she said, "Oh, yeah, I voted for you." She said, "I voted for you because I like your name." And I was like, "God help us. I'm flattered that you voted for me, but you're really going to tell me you voted for me because you like the sound of my name?" But you see it played out every single day in the news. I mean, people are going and taking shots at Tesla dealerships, burning Tesla automobiles, throwing Molotov cocktails on them, and keying people's property that happen to be driving Tesla. And why? Because Trump hired or put Musk in place to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse of taxpayer money. Now, I just can't put that together. So why would someone want to protest eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse?
Well, I think the general thought there is they're trying to protect their jobs in government funds. They are either paid to do that or they're in a class where they make money off of government. And if you look at 8 of the top 10 counties in the U.S., they surround Washington, D.C. When I land at the airport in Washington, I have to hold my wallet because I feel this sucking sound of my wallet toward the Capitol. And so We want a smaller government closer to us without all of these expenses. David Brinkley, in When Washington Goes to War, wrote a piece that I just cannot forget. The income tax was only paid by about 20% of the people until World War II. World War II, they started having everyone pay and file income tax returns, and people couldn't write a check for their whole tax once a year, so they instituted the withholding tax. And when the war ended, they decreased military spending, and the withholding tax all of a sudden is bringing this money in. And the politicians were talking and saying, well, do you think we should reduce the tax or return this money? And one of them said, well, I guess the people want us to spend it because they're not saying anything. And so since that time, if you really think about it and see the things Doge has exposed, these politicians have to invent ways to spend money, because if they don't spend money, then they don't get as much budget the next year. And so it's a full-time job trying to figure out ways to give money out. And then they have the politicians and the other people in what I call the all-you-can-take buffet. They want to participate and benefit from those expenditures as well.
Well, it does tend to illustrate the mentality of a large segment of our society who are actually going to the polls and voting. And it seems to me that they make their decisions based on sound bites and what they're reading in the mainstream media, which we know now are just not truthful stories. And the way that they are portraying Musk and portraying Doge are basically just falsehoods. They're working for free. They're brilliant people that are working on behalf of every single living American, except for those who are feeding at the trough. And you watch these demonstrations that are taking place. The signs in Portland look just like the signs that are in West Palm Beach, and the talking points are the same. I mean, it seems to me that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino should be investigating where this domestic violence is coming from, and that we need to track the money back up to the source and hold those people accountable for being domestic terrorists, because that's basically what they are. And for ends that I just don't understand. I cannot wrap my head around it.
Well, exactly. And then we find out that grants and other monies are going to NGOs, and that money's going to those groups. And so they're using taxpayer money in a lot of instances to fund these activities. When we had the Biden border issue, the NGOs were being funded by the U.S. government. So we were basically funding money to bring illegal aliens into the country, which money those illegal aliens representatives were paying to the cartels, which means we were paying the cartels to import illegal aliens into the country. That's how ridiculous it was.
And now you've got judges that are trying to stand in Trump's way of sending those people back to their home countries. And these people are certified criminals because they entered our country illegally. And we have an immigration process that we welcome people from foreign countries to come to our country. But you got to follow the law in doing so. So how do we stop these activist judges that are trying to stand in the way of the duly elected president of the United States, who was voted in by 77 million Americans?
Well, I think that's a great question. I was privileged in Texas to serve for 8 years on the Texas Judicial Council. It was chaired by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and its objective was to help make the Texas court system work better. Each state has one of those, and there's a national one. And that group and the U.S. Congress and the Supreme Court, which is the only court authorized in the Constitution, those are the three bodies that can affect how these other courts operate. And I think that they have to act, because when we allow, regardless of which side of an issue, a district judge to set up a national stay of an act or influence national policy, that gives that individual out of those 700 judges more power than the president or any other person in Washington.
They are
and
usurping the power of the president.
Republic that way at all.
Yes, I am so on board with what you're saying, and it sets up a constitutional crisis between the presidency and the judiciary. I think the Supreme Court has got to come to the table and make the right decision. If the president is enforcing the laws of the land, which is his job, every living American has to support him in doing so. But there are some evil forces at work in our country, and I fear that that's part and parcel of what we're seeing. Richard Battle, you are an inspirational person to me, and I've so enjoyed our conversation today, and I don't want to end on a bad note, but I think I would be remiss if I did not give you praise and props for the adversities that you have overcome. When I was a kid, I had my share of adversity. I had an alcoholic parent, and it was a very difficult burden to live with. Even though I loved my mother very much, she was ill, and her illness was alcoholism. But when I look at your past and think about the adversity that you've experienced, I have no justification at all to complain about anything that's happened to me in my life. But you survived a fire that actually killed one of your neighbors. You experienced financial ruin during the Texas and the national real estate collapse in the 80s. You went through a divorce. You experienced 2 heart procedures. You survived. You are a cancer survivor, and it pains me to even say these words, but you lost your only son, and as the father of 3 boys, it's hard for me to even contemplate the pain that you must have experienced. I don't know how to phrase the question. How do you keep putting one foot in front of the other, and how have you become successful in spite of all these adversities?
Well, thank you. And first thing is, there are people who've been through much worse than me, and I've been blessed to have had recognition and success in many, many places. So it's an interesting balance that I've experienced. But a couple of things that really help me, whenever I have the tendency to start thinking negative thoughts, I find that I'm doing that because I'm thinking about myself. And when I think about other people and what I may be able to do to help them, my thoughts are much better and more positive, and I get the focus off of myself. And to me, that's one of the greatest things. Second, the tendency when we suffer is to think, why me? And I discovered, for at least me, I think that's the wrong question to ask, because I believe why me looks in the past. I don't believe God is there. And we can get trapped in the past, focused on that negative event. I believe the right question for us to ask is, what now? What lesson am I supposed to learn from this that I can make positive for myself and help others? And I think looking that way looks into the future, and I believe that's where God is, waiting for us to come with Him so we can fulfill His purpose. And I only want to suffer once for one lesson. So whenever I have an experience, I want to figure out, what am I supposed to learn out of this so I don't suffer a second time. And it's served me well, and hopefully helped me to help others. Because like I say, I know people personally who've been through much worse than I have. And I just hope that I can use that for benefiting myself and others.
Well, you have been an inspiration to me in these last 30 minutes, and I'm so grateful to you for coming on, sharing your story, being willing to be as vulnerable as you have. And I commend you on such a great, optimistic, and an attitude that I would say reflects gratitude. And I think that is a very redeeming human quality. And I just commend you and thank you. It seems to have worked out pretty well for you in terms of your approach to your adversity. You're an executive with Reynolds and Reynolds. Is that the car company software support company?
Yes, and I retired or reformed executive with that company from some years ago.
And Governor Rick Perry, as you spoke about a moment ago, appointed you to the Texas Judicial Council and the Texas Emerging Technology Fund. You have been involved and active in the Chamber of Commerce, and amazingly, have written 11 books, the latest of which was I highlighted at the beginning of the segment, Made in America by Americans, and Americans. And you do have a can-do attitude. So I think that has everything to do with your success. And I wish you continued success, and welcome you back onto The Truth anytime that you're able to come.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here. We'd be happy to join you anytime. And we always end our part saying, God bless America.
And I join you in the theme that you've espoused. Thank you, Richard Battle. It's been my pleasure. And I know I speak for our listeners as well.